And 6 days after that, you said this on MSS Now. Let's play this.
It's a moral abomination, yeah, and yes, it's tactically stupid. They bombed a submarine and just let the sailors drown to death. Going again, even the Nazis didn't do that during World War II, apparently. Even the Nazis collected people from the water.
Now, that is you playing the Nazi analogy just 6 days after you told people to stop playing the Nazi analogy, isn't it?
Piers, come on. You can do better than this.
You say things like, even the Nazis didn't do that. It's like, no, but the Nazis did murder 12 million people and did kill 6 million Jews in the Holocaust. So the Nazis weren't that
Every time
great,
I come on this show, you make this point. So let me make this point one more time. So that's a cheap shot and you know it. And by the way, Nick Fuentes is a neo-Nazi, but he hasn't killed 12 million people. Come on, Piers. When you opposed the Iraq War in 2003, Nick Griffin, a Nazi in the UK, opposed the Iraq War. Was he one of your bedfellows? Am I pleased he's not ruling the country? It's a question in vacuum. So does that mean I'm pleased with his son ruling the country? Because it's a weird gotcha question without
No, I'm not asking about his son.
I don't want to say yes to that because that implies that I'm okay with the fallout from it, which I'm not. But I have made my position clear.
Asking about the situation. Simply asking, are you pleased that he's no longer ruling the country?
No, I'm not pleased about what's going on right now in Iran, which involves killing Khamenei. So I'm not going to answer your question out of any context for you to clip this out of context.
What makes this exchange worth your time is not just that Mehdi Hasan pushes back on Piers Morgan. It is that he refuses to let the whole conversation get dragged into the usual trap, where war, state violence, and propaganda all get reduced to one clipped gotcha and one fake moral test. Because that is what Piers is trying to do here. He is not really testing the argument. He is testing whether he can pull Mehdi away from the actual issue, which is Netanyahu's information war, Trump's reckless alignment with it, and the wider attempt to shame, smear, and silence anyone who steps outside the approved script. And that is where this gets serious. The moment criticism of a government gets treated like disloyalty, and the moment every challenge to a war narrative gets reframed as extremism, you are no longer watching honest debate. You are watching message control. If you believe commentary should expose that kind of message control instead of helping it, like the video, subscribe to the Sterling Lens, and stay with me. Now let's get into it.
6 days ago, I think it was on X, when someone compared the Iranian regime to the Nazis, you chastised them, saying, putting aside how lazy the Hitler-Nazi analogy is, and focus on how dumb it is. Nazi Germany had invaded, occupied all its neighbours. Iran hasn't, but Israel has. But then 6 days after that, you said this on MSS Now. Let's play this.
It's a moral abomination, yeah, and yes, it's tactically stupid. They bombed a submarine and just let the sailors drown to death. Going again, even the Nazis didn't do that during World War II, apparently. Even the Nazis collected people from the water.
Now, that is you playing the Nazi analogy just 6 days after you told people to stop playing the Nazi analogy, isn't it?
Piers, come on. You can do better than this. That's two different things completely. One is saying that Iran is Nazi Germany in its ambitions, in its political agenda, in its conquest plans, in its military threat. None of those things are true. No serious person looks at a country that's been besieged by sanctions, surrounded on all sides, has a military that doesn't come anywhere close to Hitler's military, hasn't actually invaded its neighbors in the same way that Nazi Germany did, has no aspirations to take over the continent or the region despite Lindsey Graham's nonsense sectarian claims. It's not Nazi Germany. I think you and I can both agree on that. Now, the point I was making on MS Now was not that Iran or America, I'm not saying the American military is Nazi Germany either. I was simply pointing out that what Peter Hegseth did by torpedoing that Iranian unarmed vessel in international waters off the coast of Sri Lanka that was taking part in a display, in a ceremonial event in India. We knew it was an unarmed ship, posed no threat, wasn't part of the war effort. We sunk the ship with a torpedo and then left the people to die, just as they do with those boats in the Caribbean. We left the people to die, and I was pointing out that goes against the norms of all naval maritime warfare. I'm no expert. This is what I'm told. I'm told that goes against all the norms of maritime war, that even in World War II, there were times when the Nazis shot down boats and saved, pulled in some of the survivors. That doesn't mean I'm saying the American military or the Israeli military is Nazi Germany. I'm simply pointing out that some of our tactics are so barbaric that they compare to some of the worst people in history. That is not the same as saying Iran is Nazi Germany and therefore we should invade. Piers, you know this. You're slightly older than I am. You know that every time we've gone to war, We've accused our enemies of being Hitler. We said it about Saddam. We said it about Milosevic. We said it about Gaddafi. That is the lazy go-to move. And I know you hate me comparing Trump's rhetoric to Hitler's rhetoric.
No, I know. But when you say
Iran to
I know,
Nazi
but
Germany.
Mehdi, come on. When you say things like, even the Nazis didn't do that, it's like, no, but the Nazis did murder 12 million people and did kill 6 million Jews in the Holocaust. So the Nazis weren't that
Every time
great,
I come on this show, you make this point. So let me make this point one more time. So first of all, I'm sure you've compared Russia's and Putin's invasion of Ukraine to horrible, horrible historical episodes. You've said this before. I just want to nail this once and for all, because it's been multiple times. If you compare something to the Nazis, that doesn't mean it's always 12 million dead. Would you agree with me that Nick Griffin is a Nazi, the UK BNP leader? A court said you can call him a Nazi. Would you agree he's a neo-Nazi?
Well, he's a far-right lunatic, yeah.
You would never call him a Nazi because a court said you could call him a neo-Nazi. Are you saying skinheads with swastikas who run around European towns attacking migrants who say Heil Hitler, are they Nazis? I would say they are. But they haven't killed 12 million people.
The criteria
that you can only be a Nazi.
I'd categorise them as Nazi sympathisers. But my point being, you went in 1 week.
My point being is, you don't have to kill 12 million people.
Using Nazi analogies.
I didn't say that. Now, Piers, this is really bad on your part. That's not what I said. I said that don't call Iran Nazi Germany. And then I said, let's not do things in the Pacific that even the Nazis didn't do. That's a completely different point. But if you can't see it, I'm sure your viewers do.
I think probably we should just all stop using the Nazis and Hitler in every debate about everything that happens.
Fair enough.
What's odd about this war, really odd, because this could never have happened 25 years ago about anything. The fiercest opposition to the war hasn't just come from people like you on the left, which should be expected, but it's come from Tucker Carlson, from Candace Owens, from Nick Fuentes. Fuentes has even said it's time for the far right and far left to come together, even if that means voting Democrat. I mean, an extraordinary statement to make. How do you feel about your new bedfellows?
Well, come on. That's a cheap shot, and you know it. And by the way, Nick Fuentes is a neo-Nazi, but he hasn't killed 12 million people. Come on, Piers. When you opposed the Iraq War in 2003, Nick Griffin, a Nazi in the UK, opposed the Iraq War. Was he one of your bedfellows?
No, I'm not actually saying they're your bedfellows.
I'm
not saying, do you understand?
We can't all choose
do you
our
feel
allies,
like I do?
And by the way, look.
No. Of course, Mehdi. Of course,
sorry.
I'm not judging you by I'm not judging you by who else shares your view of this war, because there are many people on all sides. I just think it's politically fascinating that some of the most high-profile right-wing commentators in America, if you basically hid their image and their name and change their voice a bit, people might think it's you. And I find that's a real shift in the conservative right in America, isn't it? It's just fascinating.
Yes, it is. And I hope no one ever confuses me for Nick Fuentes or Candace Owens. But let me say this to you. Donald Trump has betrayed a section of his base. Now, look, I'm not one of these people who says there's a big split in MAGA. You look at the polls, most Trump voters are cultists. They're happy to change their positions and suddenly become pro-war overnight. But there are a few people, as you say, like Tucker Carlson. Marjorie Taylor Greene has been very strong as well in calling this out. Yep. Look, you said it at the beginning. Donald Trump has completely betrayed, because he's a liar, every promise he made. He said that vote for Harris, World War III. Vote for Harris, Middle East wars. Vote for Harris, Muslims will have to die. Vote for Harris, US troops will have to join a draft. On the weekend, Caroline Leavitt, Piers, astonishingly refused to rule out the military draft coming back, which is an insane thing to even have to be asked about. So he has completely done a U-turn on this. Whether he gets punished by a significant enough number of his own voters, the Nick Fuentes types who defect or stay at home in November, we shall see. But he's clearly lied. And J.D. Vance, by the way, Piers, the man who was the most anti-war member of his cabinet, who gave long speeches about no reason to go to war with Iran, he's just disappeared off Twitter. He used to be on there trolling me every other week, trolling left-wing journalists. Now he's quiet. He's gone to ground because he knows they cannot defend the indefensible.
Interestingly, I think politically it's been a very bad week for Vance, actually, because the anticipation that he would be the logical successor to Trump, he has just disappeared this week. And the one who's emerged as a much stronger person, I think, on the Trump side, if you're looking for someone to maybe run in 2028, probably Marco Rubio now.
Although I would push back in Piers and say it could actually work in Vance's favour if this turns into the disaster some of us think it will, in that he can say, well, I was always against it, you know that. Behind the scenes, I was the guy pressuring. It was Marco out there trying to invade every country from Venezuela to Iran to Cuba. And look at the disasters Marco wrote. He was never one of us. He was never MAGA.
True.
I frankly find both of them to be deeply overrated. I wouldn't be surprised if the Republican contender in 2028, if it's not Trump, is actually neither Marco Rubio nor J.D. Vance, but it's, to quote Donald Rumsfeld, a known unknown. It's someone who's out there. We don't quite know who they are, but they emerge from the ashes of another disastrous Trump presidency. I think Vance and Rubio, deeply overrated figures. You saw Rubio having to do a cleanup in aisle 12 last week when he had to come out and say, no, I never blamed Israel for this. I didn't say we did it because of Israel. And then the reporter's like, well, I was the one who asked you the question. It was a greatly embarrassing moment for Marco Rubio on the Capitol. It was a greatly embarrassing moment for Marco Rubio on the Capitol.
It was, and he clearly, I think, meant what he said the first time, and then they decided to shift the narrative because they realised.
Oh, Piers, you can't say that. You'll be accused of anti-Semitism.
By the way, on that, you saw the spat I've been having with Ben Shapiro, and I've responded to him today with a quite lengthy piece about it, because I do think it's ridiculous that this idea that you cannot criticise the Israeli government, specifically, I've always been very specific, I'm criticising the government and its actions, not the Israeli people, not Jewish people. I don't have an anti-Semitic bone in my body. But people like Ben Shapiro, if there's any sign that you are not absolutely blindly in favor of everything Israel does, then you are anti-Semitic and you must be shamed, mocked, preferably cancelled. And he's basically gone the full hog with me. I mean, he's gone from being a willing guest on my show many times when I was always defending Israel's right to defend itself. And then the moment I got more critical of the government in the war on Gaza, that was it. Never replied to messages, and now has come out fully swinging. I just find it ridiculous that in a democracy like the United States, he can't see how ridiculous that is for somebody trying to position himself as a great free speech warrior.
Welcome to our world, Piers. This is what some of us endured for many years. This is cancellation of people who speak out against Israel. There's a reason they're targeting you and Tucker Carlson in particular, because you have these huge platforms and you were seen as quote unquote reliable allies, and you can't be dismissed as, crazy leftists or mad Muslims, and therefore you have to be shut down before anyone else. And they're not hiding this stuff, Piers. Benjamin Netanyahu's talked about the information war being the front line, the main war that Israel's fighting, taking over TikTok being the most important strategy for pro-Israel side with the Ellison family. They're not hiding the fact that they know they're losing the messaging war. And instead of stop doing war crimes, they're just trying to suppress free speech. And it's going to backfire, sadly, on Jewish friends of mine, on the Jewish community in this country. Because once you devalue an important term like anti-Semitism, once you cheapen a phrase like anti-Semitism, once you start calling anyone who criticizes Netanyahu or the killing of kids, when you call Miss Rachel, the world's most popular children's entertainer, an anti-Semite because she said don't kill kids, right? You're completely undermining the very important common struggle we should have against anti-Semitism. We have Republican group chats every week leaking out of young Republicans talking about Jews and black people in the most vicious terms. And then you turn to the leadership of Jewish organizations in this country, the ADL, Jonathan Green, and they're busy just talking about Israel and Iran. And I very, very worry about the fact that when, I don't want to say the real anti-Semitic wolves, they're anti-Semites of all types, but when the anti-Semites, the OG anti-Semites of the far right, the Nazi types, if you will, when they're back on the rise and you have people just singularly focused on what is some college kid on campus holding on a placard, what is Piers Morgan saying, who is Tucker Carlson platforming, if that's your only metric for anti-Semitism, then we're all screwed, because the forces of bigotry are on the rise against Jews, against Muslims, against minorities of all types.
The term moral abominations, right? I think we can all agree there's been a lot of moral abominations going on generally in the last few years. But according to independent human rights groups, the Iranian regime slaughtered up to, and I use that word, we don't know for sure, up to 30,000 of its own people during the recent protests in January. At the time you posted, I have a feeling a lot more Muslims around the world would support the Iranian protests for freedom and democracy if so many members of the pro-regime change Iranian diaspora weren't such raging Islamophobes. Now, my response to that would be, okay, there may be people in that pro-regime change movement who are Islamophobic. There might well be. but they're also risking their lives on the streets to get rid of a very repressive, evil regime. Was it fair? Was it fair to muddy the waters there in the way that you did with that post?
Not really, because it's a quote tweet, Piers. For those people who are not on Twitter like you and I, a quote tweet is responding to another tweet. So that tweet doesn't make sense without the tweet I was referring to, which was a tweet from a very prominent pro-regime change Iranian-American activist, where she was attacking Zohran Mamdani for celebrating the hijab. And I just didn't seem to understand, why should women in New York, Muslim women in New York, not get to celebrate hijab, celebrate wearing the hijab or have the right to wear hijab, simply because the Iranian government oppresses women in hijabs or forces women to wear hijabs in Iran. That's the definition of bigotry, Piers, to attack one group of people for the actions of another. That was the only point I was making. And by the way, I wasn't talking about people on the streets of Iran. The Iranian diaspora, Piers, as you must have noticed by now, contains some seriously unhinged people. I think this is recognized by even Iranian Americans, that there are people in their own community who are really out there. And you'll remember this from the Iraq War. There were British Iraqis who were just raving for war. They wanted Ahmed Chalabi to come in. They said anyone who opposed the war like you and me were pro-Saddam. And that happens in every diaspora community during the war. It happened with the Syrians too. There are Iranian monarchists, the people who support the Crown Prince, who don't want to hear any criticism. You know, Christian Amanpour did a tough interview with the Shah's son. They went and heckled her and said she's pro-regime. So there's a lot of irrational people. There were people at a rally over the weekend, Piers, I'm not sure if you saw the clips, they were saying it was worth it for these kids to have died, because that's what the cost is of freeing the country. If you're telling me that 160 kids is worth it, then I can't take you seriously. And too many people, not all of them, but too many people in the Iranian diaspora are so keen, I understand why, to get rid of the government in Iran, that they're willing to do deals with the devil, they're willing to support Netanyahu, they're willing to say Islamophobic things. That was the point I was making. It was an observation that I find a lot of my fellow Muslims don't sympathize, when they should, with people under oppression, because they see them as somehow opposed to them and their religion. I would like to, break those things out into separate categories. We should all support the rights of any people in any country, whatever their religion or race, when they are fighting for freedom. But that doesn't excuse bigotry or, generalizations by people in the diaspora. And I was referring to certain nut jobs in the diaspora.
The performance of the Democrats in America in the last 8 days, I would say, has pretty much summed them up. I think their leadership are very ineffectual, very incompetent, don't seem very politically astute, never mind anything else. You've got an overwhelming number of Democrat voters in America that are against this. And there's no fire in the belly on the Democrat side galvanizing the anti-war movement in the way that you would have expected. Why is that? And what is the answer for the Democrats?
I thought you were going to be devil's advocate, Piers. Everything you said I agreed with 100%. Every word of that was music to my ears. They are weak. They are useless. I mean, the leadership. I don't like to generalize, because there are a lot of Democrats like your Ro Khannas who are doing very good work in trying to stop the war, in highlighting the double standards. There is Senator Chris Murphy's been very strong. Senator Chris Van Hollen. There's individual Democrats who have been very strong. The leadership, Schumer in the Senate, Jeffries in the House, absolutely useless. When they're asked, are you going to fund this war? They can't just say, no, we're not going to fund an illegal, immoral war. They don't understand the politics, as you say, that the party, the base, is in a very anti-war, very angry position. The American public as a whole has a very dim view of the Democratic Party. Did you see the poll recently, Piers, that says the only two things that are less popular than AI is very unpopular in the US, the only things less popular than AI are the Islamic Republic of Iran, according to public opinion.
Yeah.
That's a savage indictment of the Democratic Party and its leadership. And that's because they are out of tune with American voters, they are definitely out of tune with their base. This is a moment now to go after Trump for his lack of a plan, lack of a strategy, betrayal of his base, his immoral killing of schoolgirls in a school and then lying about it and trying to blame Iran, supporting a war in which they're blowing up oil depots and civilian infrastructure without going to Congress. Piers, Tony Blair went to Parliament, went to the UN Security Council. George Bush sent Colin Powell to the UN Security Council. He went to Congress to get a vote of authorization. This guy, Trump, hasn't even bothered to do even what Bush and Cheney did when they rushed to war. And yet the Democrats' open goal just keep missing the goal, the leadership, again, of the Democratic Party. As I say, individual Democrats, especially those running for president, are doing a good job. Ruben Gallego of Arizona has been very strong. I like his tagline that Trump was elected to try and expose pedophiles and end wars. Instead, he's protecting pedophiles and starting wars. I do think that should be the line of the entire Democratic Party.
Just finally, are you pleased that the now dead Ayatollah Khomeini, the older Khomeini, is no longer ruling Iran?
It's a good question. I don't take pleasure in killing anyone. I don't think you should have illegally killed the leader, a foreign leader of a nation, who's also, by the way, a spiritual leader to millions of Shia Muslims around the world. He wasn't my spiritual leader, but he's a spiritual leader to many people I know. And that's a reality. I know people watching at home, non-Muslims, may kind of scratch their heads and say, but, you know, he's a tyrant in a foreign country. But that is the reality. He wasn't just a political ruler. He was a spiritual ruler. And to kill him, to assassinate him on day one of the war, will have insane consequences, Piers. I hope I'm not back on this show in a year, 2 years, 3 years saying to you, Piers, do you remember when I told you that killing Khomeini will have a backlash? There will be terrorism, there will be revenge attacks. I hope that doesn't happen. But it could happen. It might likely happen. US intelligence is suggesting it might happen. The blowback from killing a foreign head of state, from killing an ayatollah, a religious leader, in this way, in this blasé way. By the way, Piers, they also killed the people he wanted to succeed Khamenei. They're so incompetent. Trump now admits that in the next door building, they accidentally also killed the people they wanted to be their Delcy Rodriguez in Iran. So no, I'm never going to support assassinating foreign leaders, killing foreign leaders. So, you know, Colonel Gaddafi was raped and murdered on the side of a street in Libya. Is Libya better off without him? Well, A, not sure about that. B, obviously, I don't shed any tears for Gaddafi, but that is not what you do. I'm never going to support the killing of anybody outside of a trial, outside of due process. And, you know, it's for the Iranian people to decide their future. If the Iranian people want to get rid of Khamenei, it was up to the Iranian people, not up to Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump. And by the way, what a great regime change war this is. They replaced Ayatollah Khamenei with Ayatollah Khamenei. That's real high-level success in your regime change war. His son, apparently, is more hardline, we're told, than his father. And why wouldn't he be? They just killed his mum, his dad, I think his wife as well, his sister. It's not a guy who's going to do a deal anytime soon or roll over for Donald Trump. So strategically, it's a disaster. And legally and morally, no, you can't just kill people you don't like. Am I going to support, you know, I don't like Benjamin Netanyahu, Piers. Maybe you've noticed so for the last 2 years, but I don't support anyone assassinating him.
My actual question, though, Mehdi, was brilliantly deflected. My actual question was, are you pleased that he's no longer ruling Iran?
Well, I don't support the vilayat-e-faqih, what is called the Islamic system of rule in Iran. So I don't support any ayatollahs being in charge of Iran. In Iraq, for example, you have an ayatollah named Sistani, who the Americans have worked with for a long time. He's the spiritual leader of a lot of Iraq Shias and a lot of Shias around the world. He's never taken executive authority. He's never said, I'm going to be in charge of Iraq. He sits in his house and he gives his religious rulings. I prefer that system of government. So in a sense, are you asking me, do I hope that, you know, do I want ayatollahs to rule Iran? No, I don't. I'm on the record supporting a democratic system, but
no,
I don't support
I think
killing
it was
people. No, I don't.
No, I know. I wasn't asking if you supported killing him. I just was asking if you're pleased he's no longer ruling the country.
It's a loaded question because his son is leading the country. So am I pleased with that? No, I'm not pleased with his son leading the country. It's not a question you can answer in a vacuum, can you, Piers?
Well, no. So if you're not pleased with the son ruling the country,
are you pleased that Saddam Hussein? Are you pleased that Saddam Hussein is not ruling Iraq?
Yeah.
But you oppose that war like I did?
Yeah.
Okay.
The two things are
so you can hold multiple positions
compatible
at one time. Agreed.
Absolutely.
Agreed.
There's no problem saying that you're...
I'm agreeing with you.
You could easily... So you've agreed... You've now said that you're pleased the son... You're not pleased the son is running the country. Is that what you said?
No. No, I'm not.
Ah.
Not at all. I've said that publicly.
But, so does it automatically follow you...
And he's only ruling the country. Hold on. He's only ruling the country because we killed the leader before him, his dad.
I understand that. But I'm just trying to work out by natural process of elimination, you must therefore de facto be pleased that the dead Ayatollah is no longer ruling the country.
Am I pleased he's not ruling the country? It's a question in vacuum. So does that mean I'm pleased with his son ruling the country? Because it's a weird gotcha question without
No, I'm not asking about his son.
I don't want to say yes to that because that implies that I'm okay with the fallout from it, which I'm not. But I have made my position clear. I don't think any Ayatollah should be running Iran. That's not my political or religious viewpoint.
So it sounds like a yes.
But I don't think you should kill them in order to get rid of them. But I don't think you should kill Ayatollahs in order to get rid of them. I
didn't ask you if you supported killing him. I just said, are you pleased he's no longer ruling the country? Sounds like you are, but you're just very reluctant to use the word yes.
Yeah, because I have to think through the consequences of what I'm saying, Piers. It's good for you to ask a great question in a vacuum, but if I say yes to that question, does that mean I'm supporting what Trump and Netanyahu did? No.
I don't think any of that follows. You could just say yes or no.
And I don't take pleasure in killing people without trials. If Ayatollah Khamenei did something wrong, the Iranians should have tried him. The Iranians should have tried him.
Wasn't the question. Mehdi, that wasn't my question. I didn't ask if you were pleased he got killed.
It was just a question about my feelings.
I just asked, are you pleased he's no longer ruling the country? It's a yes or no. You either are or you're not.
No, because I can't. No, it's not. No, Piers, it's not as simple as that. I know you've now latched onto this, but I have to think this through. No, I don't think it's a matter about my feelings.
I've only latched onto it because you won't answer. I think it's an easy thing to answer, I think.
I didn't know it was a therapy session to ask me about how I'm feeling. I thought it was about my political viewpoints. My political viewpoint is it was wrong to kill him. It was illegal to kill him. It will have disastrous effects for the region. It's mad to take out a head of state and a spiritual leader. And it's even madder when you replace him with his son, who apparently is, quote unquote, worse than him, both for Iran and for US and Israeli interests.
I'll just try one more time.
I'm not pleased at the situation we're in.
I'm not asking you about the situation. Simply asking, are you pleased that he's no longer ruling the country?
No, I'm not pleased about what's going on right now in Iran, which involves killing Khamenei. So I'm not going to answer your question out of any context for you to clip this out of context. No. Nice try.
I perish the thought that either of us would take anything from our interviews and clip them out of context, Mehdi. You would never do that, would you?
Never. It's like that time you wouldn't say if
Mehdi
Trump was a
Hasan?
racist or not when I asked you about 7 times on my show.
Mehdi, you can ask me again next time I'm on your show, but it's always good to have you on Uncensored. Thank you very much.
Come back anytime.
What Mehdi Hasan exposed in that exchange was not just Piers Morgan's interview style. He exposed the mechanics of narrative policing. That is the real story here. Because once you strip away the interruptions, the fake confusion, the little gotcha loops, and the clipped moral tests, what you are left with is a very simple pattern. The substance of the war becomes secondary. The management of dissent becomes primary. And that is exactly what an information war looks like. Notice how often Piers tries to drag the conversation away from systems and back toward performance. Away from policy and back toward phrasing. Away from what states are doing and back toward whether Mehdi can be cornered into one isolated word, one isolated sentence, one isolated emotional reaction that can then be chopped up, circulated, and weaponized. That was the whole game. Not, is the policy legal? Not, will this produce blowback? Not, what are the strategic consequences of assassinating a head of state? Not, why is criticism of Israeli government conduct being aggressively delegitimized across media spaces? No. The game was, can I get you to say one thing that sounds bad without context? That is not journalism. That is extraction. And when a host keeps returning to that method over and over again, it tells you something important. He does not have a strong defense of the underlying policy, so he has to turn the discussion into a test of optics. That is why Mehdi's refusal mattered. He would not let the discussion become a therapy session about his feelings. He kept trying to drag it back to law, policy, consequence, history, and power. Piers kept trying to drag it back to a clipped yes or no that would function as a little propaganda asset afterward. That is the divide. And let us be honest about why that divide matters. Because this is not happening in a vacuum. This is taking place inside a media ecosystem where platform influence, donor pressure, ideological loyalty, and state messaging all interact with each other. When Netanyahu openly talks about the information war, people should actually take him seriously. Most governments try to hide this stuff behind euphemisms. They will say public diplomacy, strategic communications, countering disinformation. But when leaders are effectively telling you that controlling perception is one of the main fronts of battle, believe them. And once you do, a lot of this starts making more sense. Why do certain critics suddenly become unacceptable the moment they move from mild concern to sustained criticism? Why do people who were perfectly respectable yesterday become dangerous today? Why does the accusation of anti-Semitism get thrown around so cheaply and so indiscriminately the second someone questions state conduct? Why do hosts, commentators, and institutions become less interested in examining the war than in disciplining the people opposing it? Because the argument is being lost on the merits. That is what this whole spectacle reveals. When you are winning on the merits, you do not need to spend this much time criminalizing dissent, pathologizing criticism, and guilt by association smearing anyone who departs from the line. You do not need to panic about TikTok. You do not need to treat college protests, children's entertainers, independent journalists, and mainstream hosts as existential threats. You only do that when the images are too clear, the facts are too ugly, and public patience is starting to run out. That is the real panic underneath all of this. And Mehdi understood that. That is why he did not get flustered by the Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens bait either. Because that move is another classic fraud tactic. If bad people agree with you on one narrow point, then your position is suspect. It is childish. It is intellectually lazy. It is a way of avoiding the actual question. History is full of moments where people with vile politics happen to oppose a particular war, invasion, or intervention. That does not suddenly make the war good. It does not purify the policy. It does not rescue the argument. If a neo-Nazi says the sky is blue, the sky does not turn green just to preserve your moral comfort. That is how unserious that line of attack is. And Mehdi did exactly the right thing. He flattened it immediately with the Iraq comparison. Because the point was obvious. You do not judge an anti-war position by whoever else happens to hold it. You judge it by whether the war is legal, moral, strategic, and defensible. That is what grown-up analysis looks like. Everything else is theater for people who want to dodge the point. And this is where the whole Piers Morgan performance starts to look especially shabby. Because what he is really doing throughout this exchange is trying to preserve plausible deniability. He wants the appearance of open debate. He wants the posture of balance. He wants the aesthetic of asking hard questions. But at key pressure points, he reverts to containment. He stops interrogating the war and starts interrogating the critic. He stops examining state violence and starts examining whether the dissenter can be made to look inconsistent, emotional, or tainted. That is not neutral. That is directional. And too many of these media figures live in that space now. They are not straightforward propagandists. In some ways, that makes them more effective. They package themselves as free speech people, independent thinkers, anti-cancel culture warriors, anti-establishment mavericks. But when a real pressure point shows up, when empire is on the table, when Israel is on the table, when donor influence is on the table, when the bipartisan war machine is on the table, suddenly the boundaries appear. Suddenly the conversation narrows. Suddenly words become dangerous. Suddenly context becomes inconvenient. That is the tell. And Mehdi kept hitting that tell over and over again. Look at the anti-Semitism section. That was one of the most important parts of the whole exchange because it cuts to something bigger than one interview. When accusations become detached from seriousness, they stop functioning as protection and start functioning as political weapons. That does not help Jewish communities. It weakens genuine anti-bigotry work. It blurs the line between real anti-Semitism and political disagreement. It burns credibility. And when credibility is burned often enough, the actual bigots, the real ones, the far-right lunatics, the white nationalists, the old-school anti-Semites get more room to move. That is the obscenity of it. You cheapen the word, then act shocked when people stop responding to it with the urgency it deserves, and that is not some abstract communications problem. That has real consequences. Jewish people do not benefit when institutions pour all their moral energy into defending a foreign government from criticism, while underreacting to the rise of actual far-right hatred. Muslims do not benefit when every criticism of war gets coded as suspect. Working people do not benefit when political language gets so polluted that nothing can be named clearly. The only people who benefit are the people who want maximum confusion and minimum accountability. That is who this serves. And let us talk about the ending sequence, because Piers really gave the whole game away there. The endless question about whether Mehdi was pleased the Ayatollah was no longer ruling, that was not a search for truth. It was a trap designed to collapse a complex moral and political position into one little clip-friendly answer. If Mehdi says yes, the implication becomes that he endorses the assassination and everything that follows from it. If he says no, then the implication becomes that he supports the ruler himself. Either way, the actual analysis gets erased. That is why Mehdi refused the frame, and he was right to refuse it. Because serious people understand that you can oppose a system without endorsing illegal assassination. You can oppose a ruler without celebrating a destabilizing act of war. You can want democracy without wanting regime change delivered through bombs, covert action, and blowback. In fact, anyone with even the slightest memory of Iraq, Libya, and the broader disaster of Western interventionism should understand that immediately. But the war crowd never wants that memory activated, do they? They never want people to remember that these operations do not end neatly. They do not want people to think about what comes after the dramatic strike. They do not want the public asking whether killing one man produces a vacuum. Fragmentation, retaliation, radicalization, or years of chaos. They do not want anybody asking whether there is a law here, whether there is congressional authorization, whether there is any actual strategic endpoint. Because once those questions come in, the swagger starts to die. And that is another reason Mehdi won this exchange so clearly. He was operating with memory, he was operating with history, he was operating with consequence. Piers was operating with moment management. And moment management always looks clever for about 30 seconds until somebody refuses the frame and drags everything back to material reality. That is what happened here. And there is a broader political lesson in it as well, especially for Democrats and anti-war voters. Mehdi is right that the Democratic leadership looks pathetic on this. Weak, hesitant, empty. They are looking at an administration that has drifted into another reckless war posture, another open-ended disaster, another lawless alignment with a foreign government's priorities, and they still cannot summon anything like clear moral language. Why? Because too many of them are scared of the same machine, scared of the same donor networks, scared of the same smears, scared of the same media pressure, scared of being called soft, unserious, anti-Israel, anti-American, extremist, reckless, all the usual labels. And while they are cowering, the public is ahead of them again. That keeps happening. The base moves first. The public mood moves first. Young people move first. Anti-war sentiment moves first. Then the leadership waddles behind, poll tests the morality of it, and tries to sound brave 3 months too late. It is embarrassing. It is politically incompetent. And it is one more reason the public increasingly sees elite Democratic leadership as hollow. So yes, this interview was about Piers and Mehdi, but it was also about the sickness of the whole environment around them. A media class that confuses clipping with scrutiny, political institutions that are too weak to confront the war machine directly, ideological enforcers who dress censorship up as anti-bigotry, and a broader information war where the goal is not to win, honestly, but to disorient, smear, isolate, and exhaust anyone who stays focused on the actual victims and the actual policy. That is why this mattered. Because Mehdi did not let the conversation get stripped of consequence. He did not let it become a word game. He did not let empire disappear behind vibes. He did not let state violence get cleaned up by rhetorical tricks. He kept bringing it back, again and again, to the same thing. What is being done? Who is doing it? Who is covering for it? And what the fallout will be? That is what serious commentary does. Not performance, not access management, not elite scene policing commentary. Truth over access, people over profits. And if you believe there should be more of that and less of this polished little moral laundering operation we keep getting from the pundit class, then subscribe to the Sterling Lens, like the video, and share it with someone who still thinks these media games are just harmless debate culture. And tell me in the comments, where do you think Piers lost the argument completely? For me, it was the moment he stopped arguing about the war itself and started trying to manufacture a clip instead. That is always the giveaway.